City of Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Commission meeting, recorded August 7, 2019.
Okay, I think we got the time here and call the HPTRC meeting of August 7th, 2019 to order.
I'll do a roll call. Beveridge?
Here.
Jennings?
Here.
McComb?
Here.
Siebert?
Here.
Scripps? Absent. DeBusch?
Here.
McFarland?
Here.
With Scripps' absence, Joe, you would have the alternate vote. Obviously, Eric, you can participate in the conversation as well if you'd like.
Okay, report July 18th, 2019.
I'll move to accept the report. Second.
Okay, motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Request City of Stevens Point demolish the Fox.
Right, so I've got a presentation here I'll run through quickly. The staff report was pretty detailed in regards to what's going on. Basically on July 22nd, the Building Inspection Division of the city issued a raise order for the Fox Theater, and there was a 90-day time frame upon receipt of that notice for the raise or removal of the building to occur. I will also note with Scripps' arrival, Joe, now you no longer have a vote. Obviously, we encourage you to participate in the discussion.
Leading the work.
The raise order was issued under state statute which cites that the building is dangerous, unsafe, unsanitary for use and occupancy. And the building inspector is here today and can certainly answer any questions in that regard. I also want to note that Create Portage County, who has taken ownership of the building in 2013, is working to reconstruct, renovate, and save portions of the building and have started efforts to raise money in order to make that happen. The most recent plan that Create has involves demolishing the rear theater area, leaving portions of the front facade as long as the exterior facade intact, bracing those portions and then erecting a new building in place of the theater, and then joining those two together. And I also want to clarify that the city is in support of Create's efforts and certainly will work with them in trying to make that project succeed. However, given the dilapidated state and deteriorated state of the building, Create needs to prove that they have the financial means and an immediate timeline to address those safety concerns. Again, because of the raise order that's been issued, that's a 90-day timeline, and the city would certainly want to see some sort of immediate action plan for Create to be submitted as well. Again, the intent of the building code is to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare in relation to the construction and occupancy of buildings, and it's been determined that the general public and safety is in danger with the deteriorated state of the building. Several photographs have been provided within the staff report, and I've got some up on the screen as well that indicate such deterioration. The other thing I wanted to notice is that Part 9 of Chapter 22, which is the Historic Preservation chapter within the city's municipal code, has an emergency provision section where the building inspector can take necessary action to remedy any building conditions that are dangerous to life, health, or property to historic structures without the approval of the commission. Henceforth, the raise order request prior to receiving this body's approval for such request. Therefore, this has really been brought before the commission as a courtesy to inform the commission of that raise order, of Create's plans, and to document the standards of review. I still did review the demolition standards thoroughly within the report, And, have summarized certainly that the structure has historical relevance and integrity. It certainly contributes to the historical nature of the Downtown Design Review District. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. It's operated historically as an opera house and a theater thereafter. The intensive survey also cites its historic character and its historic nature in relation to the building's architect, Oscar Cobb, who was very renowned in the Eastern Midwest for the design of several other opera houses in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the owner of the building who built the building, G.F. Andre, is also referenced in the study as being an influential businessman within the city of Stevens Point. I also want to note the building's construction is like many other historic buildings downtown, mainly of wood, masonry, steel, and glass. So again, it is on the National Register of Historic Places. The state statute indicates, or there's a threshold or criteria that needs to be met, and that is that the deteriorated state is such that it exceeds 85% of the building's assessed value as determined by the building inspector. And that, again, is the criteria for the raise order under state statute. I also want to note that the structure's vacancy and deterioration can also contribute to blight within downtown. It's been vacant for decades, and certainly having a building such as that in the middle of downtown can certainly diminish the vibrancy that's occurring within downtown. Lastly, failure to raise or stabilize the building will result in continued deterioration, which further puts at risk the danger to the public or neighbors, which is why something should certainly immediately be done, either to stabilize under Create's plans or raise the building. Here are some photos of the building. This is the front of the building here, a close-up of the overhang and the sign. Top of the building. Here's the rear of the building. A portion of the rear of the building was demolished during the mall project, and I believe that portion removed the changing rooms and a few other rooms in the back that were crucial to the theaters and opera house's operation. Here's an inside photo of the building, of the theater area, which again would be demolished under Create's plans. Some more photos of the roof. This is a photo of the front area that overlooks Main Street, and another photo of that front area as well. Here's some photos of the roof and the repairs that have gone on with the roof. Again, in terms of the deterioration, the building inspector is here and can provide some more clarification on that deterioration, such as the roof here. Some interior photos on the first floor when you walk into the facility. This is a structural support holding up the left side of one of the roof trusses. This was installed several years ago. Another photo of it there. And some further deterioration underneath the roof, I believe. So in conclusion, the health, safety, and welfare of the public is certainly paramount to the city, and thus is the responsibility of the building code and inspectors in relation to those structures. In this case, the deterioration of the building have led to the issuance of the raise order, as noted previously. In addition, the decaying vacant building can also lead to blight in downtown, which I had mentioned previously. Therefore, staff is certainly in support of the raise order and the plans by Create Portage County, which may save a portion of the building, including the facade. Again, I want to note that Create's plans to move forward should happen immediately, or some action needs to happen immediately in order to prove financial support and that the structure can be stabilized to prevent further deterioration. And that is all I have.
Okay. This meeting deals only with the demolition of the property, not with potential other uses or historic significance. We're all very aware of that. Many people spent many years to get to this point without a method to save it. So if anybody wants to speak to the demolition, we will be glad to listen. There being none. Oh, yes.
Greg Wright, I'm Executive Director of Craig Portage County, resident at 1217 Franklin Street. I guess the comments that we would like to share today are less about the reality of this being a conversation that needs to happen and more about the timing at which this conversation is happening. We agree that the community needs to make a determination about this building and that the timeline to make that decision is imminent, that it is not we do not have a lot of time left to make a decision about that. But it is, for us, having communicated to the city that we are in the midst of a capital campaign, that capital campaign is receiving positive pledges, that we are close to $1 million of a $3.5 million goal, to have the city at that time decide to announce this raise order, to have the city this week release a memo that was miscommunicated, that made it sound like the city was going to raise the building regardless. I think there is a question about whether the city is a partner for us in trying to help move this project forward, or whether the city is interested in continuing to put hurdles up to make it more difficult. And that is where we're at. Again, we agree that a decision has to be made, but the city had our timeline. They knew that we were hoping to have our fundraising goal met in April. We would have been happy to make a decision had we not met that goal in April to move forward with the raising of the building. That is something we had already discussed with the city. I think the other part of it too is just that there is some question about the accuracy of information that we've been receiving from the inspector. We were asked to make sure the roof stopped leaking, and so we did hire somebody to do some temporary patchwork of the roof. We went in and looked, and there was still water in the building, and that's what really led to this raise order. We had our architect come and look at it, and the roof is not what's leaking. There was a misidentified window that was leaking, as well as the city was supposed to have turned off our water and didn't, and a pipe burst in the process of that. And we were told that that water was already turned off, and those were the two major sources of water damage in the part of the building that has been identified as problematic. And so again, had we had accurate information from the city about what we needed to fix, those leaks would have been resolved. I also think it's worth noting that a lot of the pictures that you were shown today of the condition of the building were taken in 2013. So if the condition of the building is problematic in those pictures, again, that's the piece of this that doesn't make sense to us, and if other people want to weigh on it, they can, is when we're this close to figuring this out, why make it that much harder? One of the things that we are told all the time from donors is that they have a concern that the city is not supportive of this project. That is one thing we've heard over and over again from donors as we're asking them for money, is if the city is perceived as not being supportive of this, then why go through all of this effort? And so the city has an opportunity to communicate support for our efforts, or they have an opportunity to communicate that they're not in support of that project. Again, I don't think anybody in our organization disagrees with the urgency of making a decision as a community about this project. I think we have a real question about why now? Why not 6 months from now on the timeline we had agreed to with the city in October when we first started having these conversations?
Would the demolition portion that they're discussing impede your ability to go forward, or?
I mean, the current issue of a raise order is for the full demo of the whole building. It is not a targeted demolition of certain areas of the building. We received a raise order for the whole building to come down if we do not have the finances raised in 90 days.
I thought there was a discussion in the report about saving the facade.
That is our plan, right? Our plan is our plans, we've been working with an architect to address all of the structural issues of the building in a repurposed version of the Fox that will hopefully honor its history, while also creating a usable space in the facility. So we have plans that demolish targeted areas of the building to address the current issues. The main issues of the building are that it needs a new roof. We know that the roof is leaking. The brickwork needs tuck pointing. There's some water getting in through the brickwork. And then there's a truss that fell prior to us receiving the donation of the building, that has a temporary structure that is currently holding it up, and that trust needs to be addressed. All of those issues are addressed in our plan to repurpose the building. So we have considered that and would have plans for it. The question again is just whether or not we have the funds necessary to do that work.
Do you have an estimate of how much funds are necessary for those specific concerns?
So we have a roughly $350,000 to $400,000 fundraising goal that would allow us to do the necessary demo work to get the building secured and ready to go. One of our concerns as an organization is spending that money if we're not going to hit the eventual goal of reopening the building. And so that's part of why we're trying to do this effort to do the capital campaign first. We don't want to have it be that the building is temporarily secured, but then sits that way for another 5-10 years, right? And so we do agree that if there isn't an opportunity for us to actually reactivate the building as a usable space, it isn't worth putting the money in to temporarily secure it either. But again, like that's why this timeline thing is even harder. Like we have enough money secured to pay for just that demo work, but it doesn't do us any good if we're going to sit with a building that's, not actually usable for a long time. And so we need more time to figure out what that final dollar amount is. Again, we are doing our best efforts to expedite that. I think you've seen that. We've been out as much as possible to try to communicate that. But again, this is just, it's like we're in the middle of fundraising, and then this thing happened that required us to completely shift gears. And so we're trying as best as we can to answer those questions as quickly as possible.
I don't know that we can do anything about your questions at
I know,
this moment.
and I guess this is our only opportunity to public.
Right.
I mean, I understand that you
Okay.
also have really no authority in this either, which is unfortunate, which was communicated today very clearly. We don't really either. I think that's part of, but I think we're just trying to take this opportunity. This is our public opportunity to communicate to the city how we feel about this decision.
Have you had discussions with the city?
I mean, to some degree, we feel like we've been asked to provide timelines since the initial word that this could happen was raised, and we have met those timelines as well as we can. Again, we specifically had a walkthrough that happened recently because we were asked to secure a section of the roof that we were told was leaking. And so we had a roofing company come and, we spent some money to patch that roof. We went in after rain, and there was still the appearance of water coming in from the roof. And so that was really what, in our understanding, precipitated this raise order. We had an architect come as soon as we could after that. And when she walked through the rafters of the building, she said, your roof is totally dry. That water is coming in through a window that isn't properly sealed, that is part of the facade of, the exterior of the building, the walls. And so that was never identified to us as something we should fix. And so we haven't fixed that window. But, and again, there was water in one other section of the building, and we assumed it was coming in through the roof because, again, we were told the water was turned off to the building. It wasn't until, part of the challenge for us is we're not allowed to be in the building. We've been asked not to go in the building anymore. And so when we were in there with an architect and found this pipe that was leaking, that was a surprise to us because the city had informed us it turned our water off months ago.
Okay. Yes, if you'd like to.
Bill Sherrill, President of the Board of Creighton Portage County. I realize that you may not have the ability to change the outcome of the raise order at this point, but I would ask for the commission to necessarily do whatever you can to vote to necessarily deflect or at least go on record to say that you are opposed to it and to provide the granted time that we would request. Thank you.
And again, could you repeat, your goal is, capital goal is,
Capital goal is 3.5 million.
and at what point, how much do you need to have to begin to work?
conversations we've had with construction companies and other nonprofits who have gone through projects like this indicate that having 75 to 80% of that goal met is a good place to feel comfortable starting. Again, there is an opportunity for us as an organization to look at a bridge loan or some other sort of financing if we need to close that gap. We are trying our hardest not to do that because nonprofits obviously have limited income that comes in, but there are some opportunities if we're at that point where we feel like we could make some of that work. Again, I think the big thing to keep in mind is that we are really early in the ask phase of this project when this announcement came out. So far, we have almost we're at like a 95% yes rate to people donating money to the project. We are getting more and more businesses to sign on to that. Again, we are having a lot of success in communicating the value of this project to the community. Just realistically, trying to meet with enough people to raise that amount of money takes time. And that's the thing that we've been trying to communicate, is that we are doing that work to get all of those ducks in a row. So that's where, again, I think we're not opposed to the idea of this. What we would love is a stay until we can actually complete a responsible capital campaign to do this work.
Have you ever been given a date or a time of kind of how much patience the cities would have?
There has been hypothetical reference to an extension if we're close to our goal. Again, there's nothing official that says that is something they would do for us. There are some things we're exploring that potentially could slow the process down of the raise order as well. We can appeal it to the state, and that's something we're looking into. And then a state inspector comes and does an evaluation of the building. So there are some opportunities for us to look into that. But again, I think there is, I think the biggest thing I would ask for anybody who is officially connected to the city is now is the best time for you to communicate partnership to move this project forward. And anytime any city official communicates that they're reluctant or skeptical of this project, you make our fundraising efforts that much harder to pull off.
Yes.
You said that you're early in the ask phase for this, and so my question is, I know that there were fundraising efforts way back in 2013. I actually was at a marketing committee meeting, so what happened with those fundraising efforts? I assume they were, promises, and my question would be expanded to include what did CREATE do with the recommendations that came from the architects in 2013, which were pretty vast, and then the further recommendations that they made in their 2018 study? That's my question. We're talking about one of the most loved buildings in Stevens Point, and we're talking about tearing it down, and I'd like to have it in the public record. This may be one of the last times we're talking about it. How did this situation develop?
Sure, I can explain that very easily. So, first of all, the fundraising efforts that you were part of that happened back were specifically to raise money for the structural study you're referencing and for architectural work to try to figure out how to repurpose this building. So we have never done a capital campaign for the renovation of the building. We have at times raised small dollar amounts in the grand scheme of things, $30,000 to pay for this study. That type of money we've raised to pay for specific work that was required for us to get enough information about how to use the building, if the building was usable, and what sort of issues we would face if we were going to try to renovate or repurpose the building. So again, we have neither the Fox on Main LLC or the CREATE board has ever engaged in a large-scale capital campaign to raise money for the project. And we are in the process of releasing all of where we raise money, where that money went to, just so if people do have questions, we're happy to be as transparent as possible with that effort. To answer your question about what's been happening over time. So we did, the building was donated in 2013. We spent some time getting an organization together to explore use of the building. We initially paid for money to do a structural study just to get a sense of how the condition of the building was and whether or not there was an opportunity to repurpose it or not. Our original goal was to try to renovate the building. That was the initial effort of that Fox on Main LLC. The biggest hurdle we ran into in the process of that was that we researched about 50 different theaters that were similar sized theaters in similar sized communities to Stevens Point, and we found that almost all of them had theater spaces that were not able to make money, right? So they were operating their business plans. We got the actual full books of those theaters and compared them and found that on average, theaters required about $200,000 of annual funding above and beyond their own revenues to stay open. And so our concern as an organization was to open a building, to put money into renovating a building that the city couldn't sustain was not of interest to us. And so the question was, if we couldn't find a workable business plan that would serve the community long term, we didn't want to ask the community for money to go into a building that we couldn't responsibly operate. What we learned again in the process of that was that the building required some sort of partner entity or some sort of additional use outside of just entertainment, especially with us having the university in town and Century in town and the Grand nearby that already serve the market. And so we were looking for a way to either have a partner join us in that effort or to have some sort of flexible reuse of that space that would provide the additional structure and funding to make the revenue model work for us. In the process of that, our first partnership after, our first plan was a large-scale plan that you may remember from the time that was actually going to involve the Children's Museum and the Q Gallery as a way to gain more space so we could have more rental income come in to support the space. In the process of that, we could never secure the Q Gallery building, and that's the middle building of the three, so that cut that plan off, and that sent us back to the drawing board. The plan after that was to look at a brew pub or some sort of other operation that could come into the space with us and share the space to revenue stream. And there were a couple of complications both with the donation agreement and just trying to find that local partner that made that a non-starter. After that plan, we looked at something we called the Fox and the Hound for a while, which was a partnership between the university and the Fox as a way to support, expand the arts program and create arts entrepreneurship opportunities. And as we started to do that, the university hit budget cuts, and that opportunity no longer was available to us. And so, and simultaneously, we launched and piloted the Idea Center to see if that would have legs in the community and be a viable way for us to move that in the space. The story I like to tell people is when I first stepped into this role and we were doing all this research about theaters, somebody told me it took us 8 years to figure out how to make this work, and I laughed at him because I was like, oh, it'll take me like 2. We've got this figured out. Like, this is complicated. We're talking about a lot of competing factors. We want to honor the history of the building as much as possible, but we want it to be a usable space. We want to create something that's exciting and energetic for the community, but this is a community that doesn't have a lot of foundations and philanthropic dollars for this type of project, so we want something that's also reasonable in our fundraising ask so we can actually achieve that. Again, we believe we have taken all these competing factors of reasonableness, excitement, history of the building, and future uses of creativity and put them into a really cool project that's taken us a long time to figure out, and that we've been piloting, and now we have 150 members of the space we're currently using. Hundreds of people come through it every month. We have a working business plan that we've tested, that's vetted, that we can run on our current operations. We have done all this work to try to be as responsible about moving this forward as possible, and we are literally we're walking through a tunnel. It says "Do not touch" right there. We're walking through this big tunnel and we feel like we're seeing the light, and it is just like, bam, there's the city trying to make that tunnel that much farther away from us. Again, why now is that question for me. I appreciate your questions, but we can walk you through all of the process that we've gone through to try to figure this out.
How much money do you need to stabilize it if you've got a timeline?
Yeah, again, so like I said earlier, our dollar amount for that is somewhere in the $350,000 to $400,000 range. We feel like we could take care of all of those stabilizing factors. We ideally are trying to do it all in one fell swoop because it's going to cost more money to stabilize the building, hit pause, and then start construction again later. And again, we want to be very careful that we don't ask the community for money that is not going to end in a usable facility. And so we don't want to put $400,000 into a building to find out that there isn't the $3.5 million that it's going to take to actually activate that building again. And so that is what we're trying to figure out. We feel like it is the most responsible thing to figure out if we can actually use this building before we put any more money into it. But that is the question we're trying to answer right now.
Okay. Michael, would you or DJ like to comment?
To respond to Greg's questions about timelines. So,
Who are you?
DJ Schneider, Building Inspection Superintendent, sorry. The 6-month thing, October started, we kind of went through that. Greg is right in the fact that up until a certain point, all the timelines were met. October, 6 months, puts us in the early part of the year. April, we hit July, and things sort of came to a halt. Back to the leaking. It's more than just one leaking, now they're saying a window, so the water issues keep happening. We tried to do a temporary membrane on the roof, didn't hold up. Most of you've been downtown, most of you see the gray stuff flapping there. That's the temporary membrane that was used to try to halt the water issues. Hasn't happened. I agree with Greg as far as the water being on yet. Don't know how that happened. I was under the same impression as him. More damage to the building. So from that perspective, one thing I would like to point out, the reports from the, say, street level up are relatively, I'm in agreement with them for the most part. One of the main issues I want to point out about these is there's very little research done on the foundation. In fact, just on the what they call the basement side, which will be closer to the street, was that looked at, so we know that there's water coming in from the adjacent properties. That's all blacktop in between there, so that's one main concern. And then also having personal experience with roof collapses and roof structure collapses. That's one of my greatest concerns is with that building. If that roof collapses, and those structures, and I can't say 100% that they do it every time, but the tendency is, like anything else, it's a domino effect. So if that one last truss that is hinging on good and bad gives way after the weight from everything else coming on it, now it's going to domino effect. And what we don't want to happen is that domino effect takes the walls, pushes them out. Now we have problems with goos next door, and both neighbors for that matter. Those buildings are close enough where there could be major safety issues.
The engineering work that's been done, find fault in that, or?
No, they identified the issues with the trusses. So there are more than one. There's more than one truss that there are issues. The ones that are mainly concerned with are, as you can see, if you're heading down Main Street in the cupola area, everybody sees the sagging cupola. I get questions about it probably at least once a week from other people in the building construction world. They're mostly wondering how is that still up there without literally falling into the roof. But the majority of the issues is in that area. So in the last rendering we've seen with what they plan on doing the building, or with the building, would eliminate that. So, I mean, that would definitely be a positive as me as the inspector looking at that, if that were to go away.
Is there a reason why that wasn't removed years ago?
That's a good question. I wish I could answer that. None of these problems are new. I mean, the reports that we have from 2014, I think the date is on the most comprehensive that I've seen. Some of the engineers' recommendations were followed, but not all of them. So then in the subsequent review, virtually zero of those were followed. So we just keep seeing the deterioration without that attempt, and maybe they're attempting behind the scenes, but me as an inspector, when I go in there, I don't see any further shoring done, the waterproofing, anything like that to eliminate further deterioration. So From that perspective, that's where the raise order came from. The 90 days is somewhat arbitrary on my part. I have to have some number. Because it's a historic building, I know the State Historical Society is coming in, or can come in, they don't necessarily have to. So I wanted to give them some chance there. As far as the fundraising, you know, I haven't been in town long enough to know the real history as to how big those pushes were. But there again, where time is not on our side, so.
Was the membrane that was put up there serving a purpose when it was new?
It was, yeah. That's basically a synthetic underlayment that they use in mostly residential roofing. So when they were looking at putting that on, I asked the contractor, you know, what kind of expectancy. The line I got was the manufacturer says it's good for 1 year exposed, which this is. So we said, all right, let's try it. It buys us a year. Maybe they can get something together. But that didn't last through the winter. You know, so we're talking from October till December, January before it was already in the shape that you see in the pictures there. So it's not working. They got a lot of wind. I mean, you're probably the tallest building in that area. You got that wind whipping through there. As soon as it grabs a hold of a little piece of that, it shreds it pretty quick.
Is that like an ice and water material?
No, it would be, instead of using the old-fashioned tar paper, it takes the place of tar paper. Ice and water shield's a little bit thicker, granulated, more so to prevent ice dams. This is just in lieu of tar paper.
And it's just tacked on?
Yep, just stapled on, just like tar paper. They did use some.
Over the shingles?
What's that?
It went over the shingles?
Correct, yeah. So, any other questions on the building wise?
Yeah, you mentioned before that none of these are new issues, new problems. My question is, why is it now suddenly urgent? Why is it now to the point where we have to tear it down in 90 days if these aren't new problems?
I can't speak for that. I started the end of January last year. It was very shortly after I started that this property was brought to my attention. So as soon as I got acclimated, I think was when last maybe April, May, somewhere in there, was the first time that I actually went through the building, seeing what was there, because otherwise I was working off pictures, stories, hearsay, conversations I've had with people in the public, some of which had been in there, some have not. So at that point, that's when I can say that I wanted to see what the progression was myself, see what was happening, see if anything was happening. We had discussions on other properties in the city, and it seems in the past there had been a lot of time lapse between enforcement of, say, code enforcement issues, dilapidation, stuff like that, where all the evidence that I had found going through any old picture, stuff like that, this has been going on for years, and at some point, you just have to say enough is enough, unfortunately. And there's never a good time, nobody ever wants to hear that, but somebody has to make that determination, unfortunately.
Yes.
These are not questions for you, Inspector. So my first question has to do with language and the language of demolition. So when I hear that, it sounds like a total raising of the entire building. Of course, I think any reasonable person wants to maintain the facade and keep that facade. I would be adamantly opposed as city alder and first district alder with that building in my district that if that front of the facade of the building has to be saved. So I guess I'm a little bit confused by the language, particularly when the city supports partial demolition. So why isn't our language reflecting that? Next question I have is who pays for the demolition via the city order? Because it sounds like Create pays for demolition if they take it on, so I'm wondering if somebody could answer that. And then who owns the remainder, or the remaining facade after demolition? And these are questions I have, but they're questions that have been brought to me by constituents as well.
So they would still own the property, the building. The raise order for me, if nothing happens, if they find that there isn't the interest, me as an all or nothing on the building. I can rescind, suspend, anything like that with the raise order. That was the discussion with them. Their plans is to keep that facade, and I would say probably is about 40 feet, maybe somewhere in there, back towards the alley. So the facade would stay there. And then there again, this is all from the last plan I'd seen. So they were the ones that would be demoing the back in that case, but there again, that's once they have the funds available and the timeline that's appropriate.
But if the city is demolishing it, who pays for it?
The Fox, the property owner, still has to pay for it.
Either way.
Correct.
So, sorry to beat a dead horse, but I'm still confused. If the city recommends that the facade and whatever support needs to be done is saved, and that is consistent with what Create wants or Fox on Main wants, why is this a difficult decision? It seems like that's what we do. Am I missing the boat here?
I guess I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
We can, I mean, the city, I don't know why, or at what point do we become a contractor versus, getting rid of the hazard? I don't know if that's what you're
So I guess,
alluding to.
as I think about this, the recommendation of the city supports what Create wants to do, but the city isn't taking on any responsibility related to that? Is that, I mean, it's sort of looking,
The city doesn't own the building.
Correct.
So Create will own the building or that site from now going forward.
but the city determines what happens to that building.
So the city
Right.
will issue a raise order, and this isn't just with the Fox, but with any particular building under certain parameters outlined in state statutes. This one is 85% of the assessed value of the building, which is minimal at this point. I think the assessed value of the building is like $2,100 or something like that. In terms of the cost, so when a city issues a raise order, they give direction on when the building needs to be raised. If the property owner, and this isn't, like I said, this isn't just specific to the Fox, any property owner, if they don't raise it within that period of time, the city can employ a contractor to then raise that building. The city would incur that cost. They would then put that cost as a special charge on the property. And then the property owner would be responsible for that cost for the raising of the building through their tax payments. If they don't pay the taxes, the county can then take that property on tax deed, and then the county can sell the property to try to recoup the delinquent taxes and any special charges related to the raising of the building. If they can't recoup the special charges, the city may then be forced to cover those costs.
So if the city has all this money laying around, why don't they give it to Create to help save the building?
So I think
doesn't have
that's
money.
getting beyond the conversation, but the city doesn't have all this money laying around. This order is being issued under a safety concern, and I think it's clear that the city is willing to work with Create to try and save the front portion of this building and try to repurpose this site. I mean, the last thing as a city development director I'd like to see is a vacant hole in the middle of Main Street that probably will never be filled again other than with a parking lot or certain green space, right? But at some point in time, the city has to also issue a raise order for the protection of the public and the surrounding property owners. We may state that, why, this report had indicated it's been like this for a long period of time, but at some point in time, that building could collapse, and we're not going to issue a raise order after the building collapses. So we need to either take the appropriate steps now to make sure that the building is stabilized, that the building is, watertight, so no further water infiltration comes into the building, which continues to degrade the building. But as DJ had indicated, the city can work with them to rescind the raise order, extend it, but seeing movement along with the project is going to be critical in order to do that. It can't sit there for another 2, 3, 4 years hanging out there, but the city can work with them to try to get this project moving, because ultimately from a development standpoint, it's important moving forward with the downtown.
Just one other question and I'll stop. So why can't the city issue the raise order as retaining the facade and certain features of the building with proper reinforcement to stabilize what exists? Why can't that be the order?
So they
Rather
could, but there's also then cost associated with that. There's going to be additional cost of trying to stabilize that facade, and for how long a period do you stabilize that facade? If they are successful in getting the needed funds for the remaining portion of the project, that will be great. But if they're not, then you're coming back and issuing another raise order to remove the front portion of the facade.
So if the city could, so if that language could be there, who makes that happen? Your office or city council or who?
So the building inspector would have the authority to issue the raise order for the protection of the public. And, our office would be willing to work with them to try to promote this project. But again, there are other elements that come into play, and who's going to be incurring the cost to stabilize the facade, as opposed to just removing the building.
So just to be clear, it's the inspector who would have to change the language from
That's correct.
demolition to partial demolition.
Correct.
I have a question about this. So that creates intent is to save the front part of the building. Is that, it's kind of hard to see on this, but is that the whole portion that's dark up until you get to the white roof covering?
Yes.
That's going to be saved? And the,
Because I think this is information that if you're trying to figure out if there are other ways to issue this raise order, one thing that I think is valuable to know about this building itself is that this building is 2 buildings that are joined together, right? So when you look at this particular line right here, this is a firewall, brick wall that joins this part of the building to that part of the building. It was built as 2 structures that are meet together. There's interaction between those buildings. It's not like it's a sealed building and then another building. You walk from one to the next. But that is, when we're talking about what we're trying to save, we are trying to save, if you take that, you can't just, if you demo this building, these walls are attached to the building next to them. I mean, they're built as brick buildings, but they've been together. I mean, this building was built in 1894. Those bricks have now basically become single bricks with the building next door. So when the city raises this building, there is a good chance they will take down what used to be Book World and what what is the Q Gallery if they are not careful about how they raise the building, right? And so that is part of what we're talking about. Part of the reason why we're not just saying let's save the facade, but let's save the facade and some of the sidewalls is those walls were studied. The reason why they're not referenced in the structural report is the foundation and the walls were found to be in good shape. And so we got information about what we should do to fix stuff, but those were studied by the structural engineer when he came. He did spend time studying the foundation and the masonry walls. Those structural engineers have been here and talked to the city and told them that they don't see problems with the foundation or the masonry walls. Again, there is tuck pointing that has to happen. There is some leaking happening through the sidewalls because of how water exits buildings near to us and how that's caused some erosion. Don't get me wrong, there are problems, but the structural engineer has not identified those as problems that need to be addressed because they aren't problems that need to be addressed. It's an 1894 building that has never settled, right? Like that's how stably it was built. It has not shifted. Its foundation is, as far as we understand it, rock solid. What we are trying to do, recognizing that there is not a way for us to renovate and restore the building to its 1894 building and make that feasible, is to use what is usable of the construction that is stable, deal with the stuff that is problematic. But there would be, I guess I don't know how raise orders are issued. There would be an opportunity, in my understanding, to say we have a 90-day raise order on the back 2/3 of this project, and then there's some time to buy with the front section, especially. That's not Just so you have information, though, that is how that building is. I also just want to make one other comment, because I think this is something that we're hearing a lot of, that I feel like is the city is going to hear more of. This question of funding for the project, there is an understanding in the community that in 2011, when a $5.9 million referendum passed the community, that money from the city was going to go to this building from that referendum. And the reason why the community feels that way is that the press release for that referendum happened with the owners of this building, the former owners of this building, in front of the building. And it was communicated to the city, if you vote for this referendum, this building is going to get reopened. The language of that referendum did not say that outright, but we have language in a feasibility study that was done at that same time that says, with the $1 million lead gift from the city, this project will be easy to fundraise, right? So there was, at least in 2010, an assumption that the city was going to do a fundraising effort through a referendum to provide funding for this project, right? My understanding is that that project ended up being more expensive than it was supposed to be, and there wasn't any additional money to go into this project. But when we run into questions about what happened to the money that went to this building, it is not fundraising efforts we did, it is questions the community has about a referendum they voted for where they believed they were setting aside $1 million for this particular project. And I think that is something the city needs to look into. That is in your history, not in ours, right? There's $1 million of funding that the city said to the city, if you vote for this, we will give to this project. And $1 million at this point in time would basically get us to a point where we would feel comfortable moving this project forward, right? I mean, I think that is one of the problems we're running into, is that there's a lot of lost history in the way that staff has shifted over time, in the way that working with elected officials, most of you weren't in office at the time that all these decisions were made, but there is history of this project. It is 2 buildings. There's an opportunity to raise portions of it. If you don't know what the foundations are, I would say the city should be hiring an inspector to study that, not making assumptions about it. It just seems like there has been an irresponsible willingness to look into the information about the history of this project, about the conditions of this building, and suddenly we're rushing. Again, I've been on this project for 6 years. Over the course of that 6 years, never did the city come to us and say, hey, a raise order is possible, until about a year ago, when suddenly we got an email that said, hey, by the way, city's attitude towards this project has changed. And again, there has not been, in our understanding, enough time going into a full analysis of whether or not this is responsible or how to do this responsibly. If the city inspector can't answer questions about the conditions of the building, that should give you pause.
Thank you. Yes, Tim.
Mike, I remember what he's talking about in terms of that picture in front of the building and the city referendum and all that. Can you speak to what happened to that money?
Yeah, I don't recall any $1 million part of the $5.9 million referendum that the city did for the mall redevelopment project. There was a further 1.7 following that to deal with a lot of the contamination issues. I do recall the event in front of the Fox when that happened, but I think the message there was, if the mall was torn down, it gives the ability for the Fox to add back on the dressing rooms in the back of the house. Not, here's $1 million, we're going to put the room on for you. It was more about, here's the land that could be available to the Fox to add back onto the Opera House. I don't recall any $1 million that was set aside for the Fox.
I was on the commission at that time. I don't recall it either, but just a couple of comments.
Just to say that while I don't think there is any public statement or allocation of funds, we do have a feasibility study that we can share with this commission if you're interested, that says in it repeatedly, with the $1 million lead gift from the city, and that happened from an interview they had with the city. So again, I do not believe, at no point were those funds directly allocated, but there is something to be said about standing in front of a building to do a press release to say to again, the understanding we are getting from people in the community is, why would I give money to this now? I already paid for it with my taxes in 2011. What happened to that money? And so I think there is some accountability there. Again, if you're standing in front of this building because you understand it's going to motivate the referendum, You know, that's the question we're trying to get into. The city seems to know how to take advantage of the Fox when it is in its best advantage to appeal to those heartstrings. But where is the support financially when we're actually talking about saving the building?
For Greg. My understanding of reading is that the last 2/3 of the building are really the most compromised part of the building?
Again, the main structural issues with the building are that there's a truss that fell.
And that's in the back part of the building?
middle, yeah, it's right around where you see that big sag by the cupola. That is also stressing out another truss on the opposite side of it. So it's pulling. You can see there's a lean to the ceiling, and so it's affecting that there. And then the building definitely needs a new roof, right? We know that. Again, and this is where I do want to say, like, there's a chance the community isn't interested in this building. Like, that's a reality of any fundraising effort, right? People love to talk about saving things, and then you ask them for a donation and suddenly they're not there, right? And so the city is not wrong about this. We do need to make a decision about this. And there is a good chance, we know it, that there isn't enough interest in this project for us to raise the money we need to raise. And that's part of, like, why haven't we spent money to deal with the structural issues that were already identified, is that there are hundreds of thousands of dollars of money for us to put into a facility that we wanted to make sure we didn't just put a new roof on it and then find out either we needed to tear that roof off because it wasn't actually useful to the building, or that the building was going to come down anyway. We have no interest in dumping money down the toilet. We want to make sure if we put money into this building that it is useful. And that is a reckoning this community needs to come to after 33 years of this building sitting vacant, is if we want to save this building in some capacity, we need to raise the money to do that. The question we have is not whether or not that question is a valid question. The question we have is why time it now in this way, right? Why not wait till April, which was our intended completion of this capital campaign, to see if we can meet that goal or not? And I appreciate Alder Jennings' recommendations that, like, why not look at other strategies or some more detailed raise order suggestions that also potentially, if we have to lose part of this building, which we're likely to anyway, that still preserve enough of it for us to be able to do something with it.
So as I think through this, it seems to me that the city is very likely to end up being the one footing the bill for this, because if the money is not available right now to do the work that needs to be done, and I should back up again, I firmly believe the language of the raise order needs to be changed to be more specific and be partial demolition. So if things proceed, a raise order, the city will, as you stated, Director Ostrowski, employ a contractor to do it. If that doesn't get paid by Create, and why would they suddenly have the money to pay for that when they've just now lost the building to do that, then the county could take it on tax deed, and then it ultimately comes back to the city, may be forced to cover the costs. So just financially, fiscally, I see this coming back to be a tax liability for the city. So it seems like from the outset, we should be doing as much as we can to be specific about how much of it gets raised and how can we try to get money out, the money from something other than the city. I mean, that's just my logic through this.
And I have a comment too about one of the preliminary arguments from the city being to prevent blight. It seems to me like raising the entire building would be the epitome of blight downtown, and I mean, in a historic downtown like that, I mean, it's just crazy to me to think about that, like just being completely, including facade, taken away. And I would imagine there would be a lot of anger on the part of the community in seeing something like that. So it's just.
And what's wrong with the city investing money in preserving the history of downtown? without having to go constantly to private donors all the time? What's wrong with the history, or, excuse me, with the city doing something long range? Why not?
I can tell you that going back into the 80s, the prior owners consistently were thinking the city would fix it. And that was never on anybody's agenda. I've got 40 years in real estate. I don't feel qualified to determine whether this building is safe or not. I don't know how this committee could do that. All of the comments made makes it sound like this is just a problem with two people not getting together, the owners and the city. Owners are saying it's the first time they've ever had a chance to discuss this. I don't know. But they said, I don't feel qualified to read all of this and come to a firm conclusion. I think the best this committee could do would be to table this. Common Council doesn't care what we think anyhow. That was told to you up front. So I kind of wonder why are we even here, other than courtesy, and we appreciate that. But yeah, this has been coming a long time. Been on this commission since somewhere in the late 80s. Commission was started in, I believe, 81 or 2 in order to get the grants to do the mall and all the sewer work, etc. And the federal government required that you have a historic commission. For many years, I've been asking about the Fox. Was always told that the city, for one reason or another, was gaining access to it. And it just continued to deteriorate. Apparently now we're coming to a point where you can't wait for more fundraising. At some point, maybe you have to stick your neck out and spend some money and stabilize it, and then maybe more funding will come later if that much is done. Is it a chance? Yeah. Is collecting money tough? Yeah. I understand all of that. But I'm not capable of making this decision. I can bring it to a vote. The committee can do what they like.
So the only, I'm trying to figure out, so this is a courtesy, but Mr. Kearns, is there any motion that can be made by this committee, or this commission, sorry?
I think you guys could certainly take action if you wanted to, but given the emergency conditions in Part 9 of Chapter 22, the building inspector has the determination to, proceed as he sees fit, and has already done so, obviously without the commission's approval. But you could certainly, if you felt necessary to take action on it, you certainly could. I don't think that action would go to Common Council, because again, it's not a required action given the avenue that has occurred thus far to get to this state. But if you'd like to take a stance on it, I suppose you certainly could.
So could I make a motion to recommend, I guess that's as close, as much as we can do, to change the language of the raise order to partial demolition in a way that agrees with the plans moving forward? Could that be done?
I think the building inspector has indicated that, he has the option to do a few things, one of which being rescind the raise order and the other being to change the raise order. And I suppose you could certainly make that motion.
Is there any?
I can't guarantee, though, because the decision ultimately lies with him, and he's using the emergency powers granted him under Chapter 22 to take action based on his determination that's outlined in the raise order. So you can certainly make that recommendation, but knowing full well that it may not come to fruition.
Well, I guess what's in my
And you
mind
can
is,
ask-
is that a benefit, I guess this commission or anyone in the audience can address, is there any benefit to doing that, or the inspector could address, I don't know.
I think it's important that we make a statement, but I'd love to hear what the inspector has to say.
Mr. Kearns is right. At the end of the day, I guess I would have the ultimate authority, where you may want to focus your attention, you know, if you're truly looking at the city helping financially, that'd be something that you might be able to help them with. To me, it doesn't matter where the money comes from, as long as it's there and they can do something with the building. I mean, obviously, that'd be best case scenario for everybody. The building stays, they get a great facility to do something that's very important. The city gets to keep a piece of its history, but at the end of the day, something needs to happen as far as that having that financial means and having a timeline that is going to keep the public safe downtown and the adjacent buildings safe also. So, you know, the timeline becomes also important too, because depending on the extent of the repairs that need to be, depending on how they go about that, that would be something their engineering and architect firm would have to come up with. The other part of it, depending on how they do that, is if any of you have been to big cities where they do save facades, it takes up some real estate too. So you may be looking at, you're hindering traffic downtown, sidewalk space, stuff like that. So keep that in mind. That's something that time is of the essence too. So if you can use your powers to get some money and they can utilize their contacts, come up with a good timeline, that'd be good for you guys, absolutely.
What would be a good timeline? Is there flexibility on this 90 days?
Yeah, actually, on the raise orders, not as much flexibility. If they come to me 60 days into this and say, we got 2.5 million and it's looking real good, all right, let's start looking at this. But if they come to me 60 days or 75 days and they got still $1 million, you can kind of see where that's headed. But more so, when it gets down to the timeline of the construction stuff, that's where I'm probably going to look to the city elders and the neighboring businesses to what they're going to want to put up with too, as far as length of that project being under construction. Like I say, it's going to be disruptive to that downtown district potentially. So,
With all due respect, I take extreme issue that a single entity can so dramatically devastate the downtown by an order such as this, that you yourself admit has arbitrary factors to it, and give no concessions whatsoever for preserving a facade that, I'm not an engineer, but yes, it can be saved. I take extreme exception to that.
Okay.
And am very disappointed.
And keep in mind, Mr. Wright did acknowledge that, this discussion did happen a year ago, so they know that this was on the table. So, any other questions?
No, I think that's good. I may be the only one around, but this committee made the library save the facades on that corner. Everything that faces Main and everything that faces Third. Clark Electric and a few other buildings. This committee went through them, looked at everything, found some intriguing things, and supposedly they were removed and stored. I don't know where. Clark Electric had a massive wall that was for testing electrical equipment from like the 1900s. It was extremely interesting, but this committee saved that corner because it had already been decided to set the library back so it didn't interrupt the view of the historic front. And that would have created a big lopsided hole. So those fronts are in their original position because of that. So it's been done, and it's been done by this committee. Whether it's possible, I have no idea.
I'd like to second that because I was involved in that. And it did not disrupt anything.
No.
They rebuilt the library using that facade on that corner building, and it disrupted absolutely nothing.
And that was multiple buildings, I think, with not, and did not have common walls either.
Correct.
So,
I don't get to vote, and because of that, I don't think I can make motions, but if I could, I would move to not approve the raise order. It's not going to have any effect, that's probably true, but it lets this commission speak with a voice that we're not in favor of raising one of the most important buildings in the city. It's on the National Registry. I don't think tabling it or anything like that has any effect. I think we have a voice, we could use it to say we don't agree.
So moved.
I'll second. But do we already have a motion?
You need to make the motion.
no, there was none.
You need to make
That we
the motion.
rescind the raise
A
order.
suggestion,
Oh,
he
okay.
moved that it accepted, and you second.
And I'll second. But I
So
do,
just a flat-out no, or?
Yes.
There's been,
Yes.
okay.
I think, I would think, I'm not on council anymore, so, but I would think that publicly and those people who are on council, I think we have to be very clear for our reasons and our hopes for this. I think it should go beyond this room, our reason for saying no.
One of my first thoughts also, will this kind of a discussion take place at any point for council to hear? The owners are saying they haven't had their opportunity.
I believe they have appeal rights. That was mentioned before, they can appeal to the state. So maybe they'll have an opportunity to argue against the raise order somewhere.
Yeah, and this committee knows nothing about that, so. All right, we got a motion to deny and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.